In today's digital age, online dating has become the prevalent way for us to seek connections. But for Black women, this landscape can often be arduous to navigate. One study on Tinder revealed that Black women were 34% less likely to get messages than white women. And OkCupid's internal data highlighted that Black women were 1.5 times less likely to receive messages from men than women of all other races. It's important to note that research has shown that this is not simply due to stereotype beliefs about Black women. A significant influence are the algorithm determinations of who's presented and matched. They've been found to negatively bias app connection patterns for Black women. Further, cultural stereotypes of Black womanhood inform the ways in which individuals engage with Black women's profiles. As a result, Black women are less likely to be matched or receive potential partner responses in online dating environments. To understand the depths of what's occurring, this episode features a discussion with Dr. April Williams, an assistant professor of communication, media, and digital studies at the University of Michigan. She's also the author of Not My Type: Automating Sexual Racism in Online Dating. In today's episode, Dr. Williams will cover all of these issues, but also provide suggestions for implementation of more inclusive and equitable experiences for Black women at both individual and societal levels. I think everybody has done online dating. Before, you used to go to clubs, but now it's just the norm when you hear about it. Maybe you can sort of situate what we mean when we're talking about online dating.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about online dating, we're talking about a range of different modes of interacting. So you can have online dating that's sort of survey or questionnaire based, so something like eHarmony, or we can be talking about online dating that you access through a mobile phone application or an app. So Tinder, Hinge, Bumble, things like that, where you're sort of swiping. But there are lots of different ways that we can sort of engage in the online dating space.
Now, I know that the Pew Research Center with their national surveys has done some research on just the statistics around online dating. And what they found is it's one of the most common ways that people are finding partners today. Why is it so popular?
Well, I think it was already popular before the pandemic. I know it was already popular before the pandemic. People were already online dating. And just to expand a little bit too, I would say, like, when we think about dating, we're not just talking about dating for marriage, right? Like, dating really is a loose term. It can be hooking up. It can be sexual encounters. It can be dating for marriage. It can be polyamory, right? Like, there's so many different variations of dating.
Right.
So really, people have been coming to these spaces, both mobile apps and online dating platforms, where you actually go in and connect with people, and maybe there's a chat room function, things like that, for a long time, at least from the 90s. And I would say earlier, right? Like, if you think about the movie You've Got Mail, that's sort of like characteristic of the time of when online dating first became more popular. And even then, a huge part of why there was so many hijinks in that film is because they were having some social stigma about using it. So that's definitely a part of it. And I would say the pandemic really propelled us forward. When we start thinking about the pandemic specifically, we can see that people were trapped inside, right? Or we were on lockdown. There were lots of social factors that encouraged us to want to connect in ways that were not in person. So online dating really was perfect for that. And it just happened that the time sort of encouraged this proliferation of online dating apps, where people were like, I need new friends, because it's not always for dating, right? People will sometimes just get on Bumble BFF, which is for finding friends or anything like that, and say, I need to make connections that feel safe.
I know the research has shown that there's no statistical differences by race in terms of who's using these apps or platforms, but it's clear that Black women are experiencing some unique outcomes and experiencing some unique responses. Can you describe what those are?
Yeah, absolutely. Black women are having a hard time on the apps for sure. And there's so many different factors, I would say layers, as to why that is. Part of it is cultural, of course. The social issues that we have in society don't just magically go away online. In fact, I would say they're amplified by being in online spaces. We can sort of see the social divisions like racism, sexism, homophobia a lot more clearly online because people are more comfortable hiding behind this sort of like pseudo anonymity. And for Black women, that manifests in either being racially fetishized, where they're being pursued because of these ideas that people have about Black women's bodies,
Right.
or Black women's identities. And it also manifests in having not as many options as our white, Latino, and Asian counterparts because people see us either as a fetish or they see us as unmarriageable, which we can talk a little bit more about that as well. But there's this idea that Black women don't fit into the model of sort of like the ideal wife. And because of that, we're having these really wild outcomes and generally just a really hard time in online dating spaces.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I know there was a big uproar about 2 years ago. I believe it was OkCupid did a survey and they found that Black women were the ones viewed as least attractive or the least selected. And so, yeah, let's dive into this issue around the beauty and desirability and the messages about Black women and how it's playing out in online dating spaces.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that it's not just Black women, but also Asian women and Latina women are also having these kind of negative experiences when we're thinking about this space of race and beauty. And really, all of it comes down to the white Western gaze. If you are not someone who exists in a body within that framing of what it means to be conventionally attractive, so thin, athletic build, maybe slightly curvy, but not overly curvy, fair skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, these kinds of things that we associate with pop culture and beauty. If you don't fit into that, the other way of accessing this sort of social cachet of attractiveness is being within that frame in possibly adjacent ways. So fitting into the sort of like meek and quiet, like idea or aesthetic, any of the sort of mainstream attractiveness that you can sort of play at. So maybe this is people dyeing their hair blonde, which not to say that being blonde means that you're trying to achieve whiteness. But these kinds of things for some people can be tactics to approach whiteness or to show that they are more legible. And so for Black women who either can't or don't want to do that, they're going to be on the outside. They're going to be framed and seen as outsiders by other daters in the pool.
What about our hypersexualization? Is that coming up in the research as a concern? I know that's historically been discussed across other genres of media, but is it occurring in this space, in this unique dating that crosses over into media space?
Yeah, absolutely. I heard some really horrible stories. So I did 100 interviews for this book in addition to the patent analysis that I did. And some of the stuff I found was not shocking because I am a Black woman who at one point was using dating apps myself. So it wasn't shocking. But I think the thing that was jarring was that there were so many of us having similar experiences where the first thing someone says when they match with you is like, hey, I love your skin tone. Or like, oh, you look like chocolate. Or, all the different things that people say when they approach you. And it's sort of like, okay, that was unnecessary. Or why would you think that I want to be approached like that in the first line? Why is that your opening line? So yes, I would say in my data, certainly I was hearing from lots of women who felt like they had experienced fetishization and even use that word when describing it. I think often when we do this research, people will sort of describe racial fetishization without actually calling it that. But in my data set, unprompted, Black women were saying, this is racial fetishization. I had one woman in particular telling me that she was being targeted by someone across different apps who wanted to engage in master slave role play. And she was like, no, that's not something that I'm interested in, right? So yes, my research has shown that that is very much the case, and there's lots of research out there that shows that Black women routinely encounter this hypersexuality, or this myth of hypersexuality, and therefore people come to them wanting to have this sexual tourism where they want to have the experience of being with a Black woman, but they don't want to commit to being with a Black woman because this is just a one-off experience. It's like an amusement park, essentially. And so we're dehumanized in that way.
I like that term sexual tourism because I think that really captures what's occurring there. You argue that sexual racism is an essential feature of today's online dating culture. Can you define what you mean by that?
Yeah, I define sexual racism as personal, racialized reasoning and sexual, intimate, and romantic partner choice or interest. And in a broader social context, this also means a set of beliefs, practices, and behaviors at the intersection of what is considered acceptable racial and gender performance. And I think that that intersection is really critical because we're not just talking about racism, we're not just talking about sexism, but we're actually talking about an experience of discrimination and marginalization that is located at the intersection of that marginalization.
And why is it so unique in these online spaces?
I mean, part of it is just because it's easier for people to look and make quick decisions based on the sort of like base level instincts or ideologies that have become norms. So it's easy to just say, oh, no Blacks, no Asians, no fats, no femmes. Yes, whites, yes, athletic people, yes, this, yes, that, right? It's really easy to do that. And we're seeing that more and more, that that's just part of the dating culture.
This type of online dating, race-based discrimination, you suggest in your book that's not only tolerated, but also encouraged. How's that happening?
That one's a loaded question. So I gotta like think about how I'm gonna break it down. So I would say anything that I think about in the dating space is always happening on both the cultural and the technical level. So on the one hand, we in culture are trafficking in these ideas about hypersexuality of Black women and the way that femininity is supposed to be performed. So because of that, we see these pop culture ideas circulating and increasing, and there's sort of like this echo chamber where we're saying these things and they show up in film, they show up in music, and then therefore they're reinforced in our daily lives. And also at the same time, the people who are writing code and making rules that govern dating apps also live in our society and are internalizing these same messages. So they are also writing these ideas into code, whether they realize it or not, or into the way a certain app may decide to sort of think about why their sorting logic is going to do what it does, or how their sorting logic is going to impact certain groups. And I'm not sure that they explicitly think we are going to target any one community. In fact, I know that they don't think about it in that way. But unfortunately, the way that some of the systems work, some people are automatically going to be excluded.
Okay, so that's exactly what I want to get into now. Can you simplify the discussion around algorithms and facial recognition and how all of that is shaping the paths and experiences that Black women are having?
On the one hand, algorithms are just fancy math. That's what I usually like to tell people. It's just a set of directives. It's a mathematical equation or a computer language that says, if this, then do that. So often algorithms are doing just that. If this person is here with this number, then put them in this stack. Typically, that's what's happening when we're looking on the back end of a swiping mechanism. Tinder or Bumble or any of these sort of swipe-based apps typically rank users. And so they won't ever say it's just based solely on attractiveness, but that is part of the equation. Part of the equation is attractiveness. Another part of it is how many other users swipe on that person, and also comparing different users to each other based on how they look and how many profiles interact with certain profiles, right? So they might say something like, if this user is a 9, send them to other users who are a 9, right? That's a piece of it. And the critical component is that part of this measuring system is that they're sort of evaluating attractiveness of users based on the entire universe of users who are in the app. But how are they doing that, right? It's not like someone is going through and hand coding and being like, this person's a 9, this person's an 8. They've created an algorithm that says this person is this level of attractiveness. And that has to assume that there is a standard level of attractiveness, which we know that there's not, because beauty is very much in the eye of the beholder.
Right. So it sounds like it's tied a lot to popularity.
Popularity is part of it, but also another piece is that there is the algorithm or computer vision, we could say, that is looking at and assessing attractiveness. And they do this with facial recognition technology, where they actually look at someone's face and they parse out for symmetry, for eye shape, for eye color, for nose width, right? We hear a lot about the golden ratio. So all of these ideas about attractiveness are from this mainstream idea of attraction, or these mainstream ideas from biology, quote unquote. But those ideas get coded into these algorithmic systems. So the computer vision isn't neutral. It is laden with these ideas about what is attractive. And so as the computer is sorting through everyone, it's doing it through that lens of Western beauty hierarchy.
When you're talking about these issues around facial recognition and sorting, you talk about how it's linked to a longer history of eugenics and banning of interracial relationships and other histories around Black womanhood and partnering and beauty. Could you discuss that more in depth?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of your listeners, well, let me not assume, um, listeners may or may not be familiar with hypodescent, or this idea of the one drop rule, where one drop of Black blood means that you are Black. And this comes from definitely slavery in the South, right? Like this idea that there is contamination of whiteness. That's what it's tied to. And historically, we saw that threat of contamination of whiteness being very heavily policed by the law and by individuals. There was a critical investment in the maintenance of whiteness. And in doing that, we have this legacy of fear about interracial relationships and interracial dating. Whether or not people think of it in those terms, that's definitely where it comes from. Idea of white racial purity. And unfortunately, that's still very much a part of dating culture for mainstream culture, even if it's not on the top level or something that's often talked about. I think it is a hush taboo where it is not something that you would talk about in mixed company, but certainly something that people talk about in their families, as the data in my book shows. That's a conversation that people have quite often. And beyond just having the conversation, it's also a social norm. And it's sort of, as I argue in the book, the last area where it's socially acceptable for people to have this quiet prejudice about who they date, because they think it's not hurting anybody. It's just a personal choice. It's my life, which to a degree, yes, of course, everybody gets to make their choices about their life and make choices about who they want to spend their life with. And that's a deeply personal commitment. But I would say if you are just sort of swiping through apps and you have this nudge of, oh, I only want to date Latina women, or I absolutely won't date dark-skinned women, I would say, where is that coming from? Is it really because you have this desire to have a deep cultural connection with someone, and it's really important for you that maybe your family is racist and you want to protect that person from that? Okay, that's a different story. But if it's because you are committed to this idea of whiteness in particular, or because it's just what your family has always said, I would say maybe take a step back and unlearn that and really think about where your ideas about attraction and beauty are coming from.
Thinking about the findings in your book, where were some of the most potent or powerful sources of influence on Black women's experiences with dating?
There's so many ways I could answer. Dating culture, dating app culture, I should say, is going to shape a lot of the experiences that Black women are going to have on the apps. There's no doubt about that. the way that their terms and conditions are laid out, the way that the community guidelines are laid out, all of these things factor into what kind of behavior is allowed to happen on the apps. And more recently, we've seen companies really take it more seriously. Their approaches to DEI and equity and making sure that they're holding people accountable. And I think a lot of that happened in the resurgence of Black Lives Matter in 2020.
So you're saying now there's more transparency and legal and ethical discourse occurring?
I wouldn't say in legal discourse, but I would say that there is more of an impetus to have those guidances in place and platforms. So I wouldn't even say that it's transparent, to be honest, because they aren't able to be that transparent because they're really afraid of this sort of freedom of speech ideology, which so often governs America. And we know that freedom of speech really mostly benefits those who are already in power, who hold that social power over ideology, not as much for people who have dissenting ideologies. And so there is definitely a move to create policies that appear as though they are serving a broader, more diverse audience.
So wouldn't a solution then be for Black women to just use the platforms that are targeted to Black communities like Black People Meet, Afro Introductions, Black Cupid? Are they less of a problem?
There's two sides of this coin. There always is, right? But when we're talking about apps that serve a particular community, I see those as safe spaces or spaces that have the potential to be safe for certain groups, right? So often when I would talk to Black women, when I was doing the work for this book, they would say, I go to these sites because I was tired of racial fetishization or I was tired of racism on the mainstream apps. And that's true. And I think that that's a valid space for any of these kinds of apps where we have like maybe JDate, or which is for Jewish folks, or we have Cheatsba, which is for Latino and Latinx folks. There are lots of different platforms that cater to specific minoritized peoples. And it makes sense for people to use those when their experience has unfortunately been like Islamophobia, xenophobia, racism, right? Like anti-Semitism, all of these things. It makes sense for people to sort of turn inward and say, this is a refuge space, right? And I'm ready for doing that when necessary. We also have to be aware, though, that these apps themselves can still have the same patriarchal norms as any other app. We're not immune from patriarchy and toxicity within our communities. And so Black People Meet, these kinds of spaces also have that toxicity. And maybe it's expressed as colorism as opposed to racism. And that's common across a lot of different spaces. Where we see that skin tone preference is still largely an issue.
What do you think is the next step that we need to be moving forward to make sure that we can support the creation of healthy online dating environments for Black women?
I would say a huge part of it is more transparency, but even more than transparency is accountability. We really need dating apps to say, we're creating the structure in which we aim to keep you safe. And if we fail to do that, we want to hear from you. Because right now, there is sort of this faux accountability where people are sort of ushered into make a report. But people often, there's not follow-up on that. People don't feel comfortable. They don't feel like they're being heard. They don't feel like they're being supported. And so we need a system where it's pretty open, where it's open for communication between users and people who are actually in charge at dating app companies.
So what are individual Black women then doing to address what's happening for online dating? Because it's not going away and it's still popular and it's an easy space to do this.
Yeah, so one thing that I've seen a few Black women doing on TikTok, which I think is pretty funny, that this is sort of the approach. People are sort of hacking the apps or glitching the app, which is when you intentionally do something that goes against the design or the intended outcome of the app. One Black woman on TikTok has documented her journey of where she is creating her profile using her same pictures. It's her. She's not catfishing anybody. She's using her photos, but on Hinge, she is actually selected that she's white for her ethnicity rather than selecting that she's Black. And she has shown viewers both sides of that. So they've seen what her connections look like. She's talked about her experience when she is Black, and then her experience when she is labeled as white. And she's having a much better time now that she's labeled as white, which tells us that the algorithm is having some effect on that experience, right? Because the pictures are the same, the profile content is the same, and yet she is being shown to a much wider user population now that she has selected the label white, which it could mean that there are people who select that they're open to all races and they're not being shown this person because they're Black and the algorithm is sort of presumed that they don't want to see them. It could also be that I really think it's just that, but there's so many different reasons why this could be effective. One could be that the algorithm has sort of preemptively selected or made the choice that some folks who might be open to Black people otherwise perhaps don't want to see them. And that's a coding decision that was made, and maybe it was inadvertent, but it has real implications for Black women. And if folks are interested in this, there's a Washington Post piece by Rivon Stinson, and she has tracked a lot of Black women who are using their profile, but they're selecting their ethnicity as white to sort of broaden the opportunity to interact with more people.
So what would you suggest that Black women do who are dating online and want to have positive experiences?
Honestly, I don't know if this is too woo-woo for people. This isn't very concrete advice in terms of like, it's not backed by data. This is just my gut feeling as someone who met their partner on Tinder during the pandemic and got married last October. I really think it is about putting out the energy that you want to attract. I think is very much you get what you give, and that can be really hard to hear and to implement, especially when you're giving so much. But just know that it's ultimately a numbers game. Like, you're going to swipe through a lot of people. There's a lot of trash to sort through, unfortunately, in these apps. Like, nothing that you're doing is wrong as a Black woman. You're doing what you need to do. It's just that there are so many barriers, right, to you making the kind of connections that you want to make. And ultimately, I would say, remember that your beauty and self-worth is not determined by how computer vision or an algorithm deems your attractiveness or your level of desirability. And honestly, take chances to game the system, right? If these things are working for other Black women, why not try it? But also, and this is another thing I would say, something that my friends and I talk about often, take chances on people that you wouldn't normally date, right? Like, sometimes we get stuck in this idea of, this is my type, this is what I want. And I'm not saying to compromise your values, right? Like, I think Black women are infinitely valuable. I think Black women are the prize, right? And honestly, most of the world knows that. And that's why it's so hard for us out here, because we are killing it. So I'm not saying compromise your values, maintain your values, maintain what you're looking for. But in terms of the physical, I think sometimes we're really quick to be like, no. And I know, like, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking of all the Black women who will be like, well, I gave this one guy a chance and it did not go well, right? And that's kind of the way it goes. But I'm just saying, try sometimes to broaden what we think we like. Because often if we're dating the same kind of person over and over again and it's not working, or we're matching with the same kind of person over and over again and it's not working, that can be a signal to try something else. And sometimes we don't always listen to that signal.
That was University of Michigan professor and online dating researcher, Dr. April Williams, sharing her research expertise around algorithms and cultural messages influencing Black women's dating platform experiences. To find out more about Dr. Williams' work, including getting more information about the book, research manuscripts, news articles, and social media handles, go to this episode on our website podcast page. This podcast is part of the Psychology of Black Womanhood's resources for classroom and community engagement. You can pick up your copy of the book so you can get more information about today's topic and other research focused on Black women's experiences. We really appreciate you taking the time to support amplifying the voices of Black women researchers and community experts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a minute to follow us on whatever platform you listen to this episode, or visit our Instagram and Facebook pages and add us to your following. You can also spread the love by sharing our podcast with your friends. Starting this week, we'll be bringing you new episodes bi-weekly, so be sure to look out for our next release in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us.